So we're here to discuss government, a government without God and a government with God, and the consequences of each. The Western world is leaving the concept of the natural law, our inalienable rights, are the moral law in governments, and therefore we have some very difficult consequences. So we're going to introduce everyone that's here today, or they're going to introduce themselves.
Hello, I'm Suzanne. I'm Patrick's wife.
I'm Patrick O'Shea.
And my name is Abraham Weeb, and I'm from Canada, but I've lived in Ireland for the last 2 years.
My name is Mark Weiss, and I'm from Germany, and I live in Ireland now. I've lived here for a couple of years.
My name is Anna Mary Weiss. I'm the wife of Mark Weiss.
So we're going to have a discussion. I don't think most people have considered, but I'm going to read something from the Irish Constitution. In the name of the most holy Trinity, for whom in all authority, and to whom as our final end, all actions both in men and state must be referred. So their government, this is one of the best preamble that I've read in the Constitution. There's other governments that have good constitutions, but a good constitution will recognize God is the one who gave us our rights and not man.
Right.
So in Ireland, for example, the last 3 referendums were trying to destroy this Constitution, because in this Constitution we all have rights, and we recognize that we were created in the image of God.
Yes.
And therefore, being in the image of God, all of us have intrinsic value. Now, we realize that nations are trying to throw off God, especially the Western nations. And they thought that they would get liberty by throwing off God, and instead of finding liberty, they're getting into bondage.
Yes.
That's
Right.
true.
So everyone's going to have a God. I'm going to read something that Nietzsche said. So he wrote a poem. He was a famous atheist philosopher from the 1800s. And many of him would put the rise to Hitler on his feet. Because he entered into a place, and he recognized that, and he knew that. He recognized that we entered into a place, if there is no God, who will be the gods? Who will make the decisions? What will come of our society?
Right.
And we're beginning to see the disastrous end of our society because we put off God.
Right.
Yes, sir.
Just recently in Ireland, I mentioned the referendums. We had a referendum on abortion, killing God's little messengers. In the name of humanity.
Yes. Yes.
So instead of each one of us having value in a government with inalienable rights, or recognizing there's a higher authority or God, we're all measured on our value. And then these gods, because if we put away God, men will become gods. The first step in the man becoming a god is to put away our God, so men become gods,
Right.
and they make life and death situations, which is God's authority, and each one of us have a right to life.
Right.
So the baby in the womb, the messenger, is killed, and they're working on euthanasia now, because now they're going to kill the elderly people. And just had an article in the journal yesterday about the disabled being ignored. This is because man has become God.
Right.
And they're making life and death situations.
Yes. Yes.
And this is very, very dangerous. And we're going to talk about this. Brother Abraham's going to talk about atheism in different countries and how that worked. And we're going to talk about all this.
So just to go off of what you talked about, it's important to know when Brother O'Shea talked about how when you take away God, you end up with these consequences. That's not just something we're just saying randomly, but that is the result of a secularist or humanist worldview.
Yes.
Right.
So if you take away the fact of man being created in God's image, if you teach a society, if you teach a child or a young person that they have evolved, that they're nothing more than an animal, we do end up with this type of situation where we as people decide who gets to live and who's going to be killed.
And I think we can directly correlate that with the suicides and the depression because
Yes.
our young people are told they're
Absolutely.
pond scum. They have
Yes.
no real value.
Yes. And you might say, well, they don't say that explicitly, that they might not tell the young people that. But if you don't have the, if you're not made in the image of God, and more than that, if you've evolved from a monkey or whatever you've evolved from, that is, if we came here through natural selection, that is the result. That where people just think, I now have the right to survive and someone else doesn't because I'm the fittest. I'm the top of the, whatever. So we can see that in history. I think it's important to look back at history. There's a mistake that mankind has made repeatedly, that we don't learn from history.
That's right.
So if we look at the 20th century, really was the beginning of or where they coined the term genocide. There were countless instances in different countries, countries who embraced Marxism and different secular doctrines, I'm going to call them, and the result were mass killings. In fact,
yes.
by the numbers that these countries give you themselves, there are documented over 100 million. Let me check that just to be sure. Yes, at least 100 million people killed by communist governments between 1917 and 1991. I'm reading from a document or an article by Peter Hammond from the internet. So if they give you those numbers, how many are there that they're not telling you about? These are not numbers just from these are not numbers from wars. These are in normal society, normal communist society, and we have this rate of killings. And as I said, that is the result of this secular worldview.
That's right.
And I believe, too, that we could say that probably a lot of the reasons why, the large reason why there is so much, abortion, suicide, euthanasia, all this happening because of atheism or whatever.
Yes.
Because people have put out God and they have said there is no God.
Yes.
And therefore, like we heard, they have made men their gods, and therefore, and obviously we know when man's in control and they put God out, then it's prone to fail. Or whatever.
Yes, we have a lot of people who will look at suffering or evil and will say we'll blame God for that. Well, if we look at what society has done when they took out God, we get more suffering, we get more evil. So. That's not a good testimony to what mankind has accomplished. Looking at the results of this communist society, at what Stalin did, at what Mao in China did, what Pol Pot did in Cambodia, that's not a good testimony to man being God.
Right.
If that's the result of man being God, it's not something we want.
I think the atheism began or had their big push in France, but now when the wall came down from Germany, the whole world can look at the destruction it wrought. I see a lot of young people with a shirt on Chavez, is that his name? From Puerto Rico, like that's his hero. And Chavez, to my understanding, put to death gay people. They have no concept. And it's very, very important. The world we're in a time now where they're trying to control the people using this coronavirus to work the separation. They become gods. They decide what is a person that's really needed. The greatest need of today is God in our society. The
Right.
greatest need now is people who know God.
So I think the secularization of government or society, it could actually, it seems like it's a random thing, but I think the pandemic could kind of possibly suggest that there really is an agenda.
Yes.
Right.
Yes,
So we have God's government, or working off of a moral base, which is pro-family, pro-church,
Pro-life.
pro-life, pro-government to in God's direction. And then we have the secular agenda, which is destroy the family. And we see like such tools being used as abortion, pornography,
yes, sister.
gender
Right.
confusion, we
Right.
could go
Yes,
this
on.
is right.
Destroy lawful government, destroy cultures,
Yes. Yes.
and they make it, they sometimes act so moral about it.
Right.
Right.
Like they moralize abortion.
Yes.
You know,
Yes, exactly.
You know, that's what did they say about my body,
My
choice?
choice.
Right.
They moralize climate change.
But now it's not your body and your choice. You got to do what the government says.
Right.
It's a control thing.
Right.
Yes, that's right.
And so secular governments are very authoritarian. And the
Yes.
goal is to get you to a certain place
This
under
is
their control.
This is something we see happening with every government who goes this route. Is a result of authoritarianism and of yes, man making these decisions that God is the only one who can make or
Right.
should make.
And when a government takes out our rights to appeal to God, and we have to appeal to man every time, it's tyranny. And whether that's religion, whether that's government, it's always been tyranny. There's been some religions that
Right.
killed people
Yes.
because they took God out of it, and there was no appeal to God.
So it is kind of an amazing thing how this is spreading worldwide with this coronavirus. That's one thing that's becoming very apparent is the spread of this.
And it's becoming very apparent the control of the people with this. Even things that have nothing to do with the coronavirus,
Right.
there's a push to
Yes.
stop
Yes,
Right.
brother.
that free speech, stop that the church gathering together, to stop
Yes.
all these types of things.
And we can see like what it brings. We talked about, some others talked about how where atheism brings us to, and all the people
Yes.
that died. And what is very interesting is, and the same thing happened to with the abortion,
Right.
is that they used human
Right.
or humanity or rights for humanity
Right.
and used it to kill people.
Yes.
Again, here in the coronavirus pandemic, the same thing happened. They used human,
Right.
healthy issues
Yes,
and all
yes,
that.
brother.
And in the end, what does it do? It separates us from humanity.
Yes.
It separates us from each other.
Yes.
And that's
Right.
actually,
Yes.
once you separate, that's death in itself anyway.
Yes, sir.
So
That's right.
that's the same thing as abortion and so on.
Yes.
Right. Exactly.
Right.
I have a quote here from Dostoevsky, a very short quote. It says, "If God is dead, then all things are possible."
Right.
Amen.
Exactly.
And we'll close with this. Life without God is absurd.
Yes.
As one of the four horsemen of atheism said, if there's no God, there's no purpose, there's no good, there's no evil.
Right.
Another man said, Dr. L. Rue, without God, we're going to have to create a noble lie to give people hope. So right now, many people are hopeless.
Right.
They're locked in their houses and they have no hope.
It's true.
Right.
Because atheism is a death culture.
Yes.
Yes.
Right.
What are they pushing now but death, abortion, euthanasia. They said they cared about the old folks, but they allowed the nursing homes not to be taken care of
That's
properly.
Right.
And how can you say all these things? So this form of government without God ultimately destroys itself.
Yes.
So we had Pope Stalin.
Mm-hmm.
We had Pope Mao.
That's right, brother.
We had Pope Pol Pot.
Mm-hmm.
It's time that the nations turn back to God.
Yes.
That's right.
Amen.
God's desire in all this is the nations would return back to God
Yes.
and allow the people to have their God and encourage that and keep that,
Yes.
that we would have our rights before God.
Amen.
Whenever we leave off God and have a secular government, good things do not follow.
That's right.